that here's the source code for this page. And here we have some very simple HTML. As predicted, there's an unordered list, as you said. There's a list item. There's an h1, a body, and all of this. And there's also this meta tag. And that's what makes things look better within the confines of this browser. But can we improve the aesthetics still? Well, let me go back and go into this CSS directory. And voila, what a pretty looking website now. And we've done this entirely by using CSS. And it does look, up until 2 weeks ago when Apple decided that all of iOS was changing aesthetically, this looks like what? An iPhone. Well, if we at least size it to the appropriate size. So let me go ahead here. Doesn't that look like your iPhone? So it kind of does, with the typical menu at the top and the sort of tabular list of menu options. And indeed, if I go ahead and click this, we see the sub page, which is lecture 0 or lecture 1. And if I keep clicking, I'll see more. But what did we not get? What features did not just happen on the screen? There's no animation, right? If you're a fanboy or girl of iOS and Apple more generally, you know that it's these little touches, like the sliding from side to side, that sort of makes the experience feel the way it typically does. But this, let me go back and do it again. If I hit the back button and then click lectures again, it just flips like a normal web page. So we're sort of mimicking the aesthetics of iOS, but we haven't really recreated it. So how could we go about getting some form of animation? Well, we probably need some more sophisticated CSS or some JavaScript, some actual logic to move content from side to side. But before we do that, let's go to the source of this page just to get a sense of what was going on here. So this is the source for this page. And if I maximize my window and zoom in here, there's only one line of code that's different. What jumps out at you? Yeah, so there's just the link tag up here, href equals ios.css. The relation is style sheet. So let's see what that is. Now, as you probably know from web development, I can just go up here, and I can say ios.css, enter, and I can see this page. And we won't dwell too much on the details here, but here's where I'm setting some font stuff and some margins. H1, so that was the title of the web page that said CSCI S76. We have a background color that I chose to mimic what Apple itself uses for its default blue shade. We're using a background image here to actually do a gradient. What does -WebKit-gradient mean? Most CSS properties and values don't begin with dashes. Yeah, it's a browser prefix. What does that mean?
So some of the newer CSS properties are different by browser. So I can't remember. I think WebKit is Safari, or is it Firefox?
WebKit is Safari and Chrome. Yep. Exactly. And MOZ is Firefox for Mozilla. So that's exactly right. There's often unsupported or new up-and-coming features of CSS that the various browsers begin to implement on their own. But if they don't necessarily adhere to a standard, or if it's just a browser-specific feature, they'll typically prefix that property or that value with a dash, then their unique identifier. WebKit is the engine that underlies Chrome, at least right now in Safari. -MOZ is the same thing for Mozilla. So this just means this is not a feature that's going to work probably on IE or on Firefox. But that's fine, because we're narrowing our focus for now just on WebKit or Chrome in this case, but it would work on Safari as well. And then I'm going to wave my hand at the rest of the details. But suffice it to say that if we tinkered enough with the CSS, even starting from a clean slate, we could replicate this iOS-looking website so that it ultimately looks like the familiar UI. But we don't get any of that scrolling with which users are familiar. So let's go back into one last directory, and let's introduce a framework here that's called jQuery Mobile. So you're probably familiar with jQuery if you know any JavaScript. If not, we'll dive into a bit of it tonight. But what you might not be familiar with are various frameworks for actually helping with the development of mobile-based websites. So if we look to pass this example here, we'll mention 3 tonight. So jQuery Mobile, as the name suggests, is a jQuery library, very popular library that's specifically geared around mobile user interface details. So we'll glance at some of its capabilities now. PhoneGap is another framework that we won't look at tonight, but PhoneGap is sort of this best of both worlds, whereby it's a framework, so downloadable code that someone else wrote, that you can use to implement native applications using HTML and JavaScript. So you don't even have to know Objective-C yourself. And we'll peel back that layer eventually, but for now, know that someone else has taken the trouble to figure out how to write the bare amount of Objective-C code that then embeds the equivalent of a web page inside of a native application so that we can just write web-based code, but still put it in the App Store, give it an icon on the home page so that it actually feels more like a native application, even though it's running somewhere else, typically on some web server. So that's another framework of interest. And then Sencha Touch, which is similar in spirit to jQuery Mobile. It helps us make aesthetics that are mobile friendly, but it's definitely a more complex framework than jQuery Mobile. So we'll just focus on the first of these. So if I go back to my other screen here, and I go into the framework sample code for today, now we have an UI that looks almost the same, but there is a little something that's different. Anyone recall what was absent last time? Yeah, so these little iOS-looking arrows. And if we go ahead and click on this row, notice that it's also highlighting just a little bit, which is nice, at least in the desktop environment. Now we have a little bit of sliding that goes on. So that, too, is pretty nice. But let's dive a bit deeper. We'll come back to this in a week or two, but I have an advance installed in an application called iOS Simulator. So this is software that Apple distributes with Xcode, which is their integrated development environment for writing iPhone applications and Mac software. And if I pull it up here, it looks like this. So it looks like the screenshots I've been using earlier. And if I go up to Safari and click here, so even though it looks like a phone, I'm controlling everything with my keyboard and touchpad here. I'm going to go to http://localhost/tilde/jharvard. Damn it, what a bad mobile website. So why is this page so small all of a sudden again? So whereas up until now, all of the examples we've been looking at were written by me, and I included that meta tag, this particular page was generated automatically by whom? This is just a directory listing. Let me zoom in. So if you hold down, and we'll get to this in a couple weeks, if I hold down Option when clicking, I can pretend to have two fingers on my laptop screen, and then I just have to kind of scroll to get back to where I want at the top. So there's the text we were looking at. Who generated this directory listing? Yeah.
Apache?
Yeah, it was Apache. So much like you've seen on the internet, any web server, if you go to a folder that has the appropriate permissions, will just show you all of the files in that particular directory. Apache's doing that. Apache doesn't know I'm on a mobile device, and whoever wrote the Apache code didn't know or care about this meta tag for the viewport settings, so it's just super small. So at least when navigating these folders for Apache, we're going to get this annoyingly small screen. But that's OK. Let me just deal with it for a few moments. Go into my CS76 directory. Zoom in again, move it over here, and then go into Framework. And now it does look a lot more like a native iOS application, right? So we're not just fooling by using Chrome. This is the actual simulator, and it would work the same on your phone. The only catch is my phone probably can't talk to my laptop unless I jump through some hoops to get the Wi-Fi to cooperate to make that work. But now let me go ahead and click on Lectures, just as I did before. Let's click Lecture 0. Damn it, I've paid a price again. What's happening? Yeah. Yeah, so I'm loading a new page, and as you might have just noticed in using an iPhone or an iPod Touch for some time, anytime you click a link on a new web page, the default Safari behavior inside of an iPhone or an iPod Touch is to very briefly show you the address bar because the URL is changing. Then it will push it away if you so choose. The problem is that there goes our mimicry of an actual native application. So again, we've paid this price. But someone argue in favor of nonetheless proceeding to implement, say, the course's website using HTML, CSS, maybe some JavaScript, without ever touching or learning Objective-C. Works on all devices. It would work on an Android phone. Windows Mobile phone wouldn't look like it belongs on either of those devices, but it would certainly still work. Speed of development. Sort of 15 minutes later, we're done with the course's website. So we don't even have to look at a line of Objective-C. And it will be more complex. What's that?
Maintenance of different. You don't have to be changing like every single native app you have.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot easier to update because even though I'm using this local web server right now, if you imagine just uploading that to the real internet and some commercial web host, I can just upload my code in one central place and no one has to update their native software. They don't have to go into the App Store to run an update. It's just anytime they visit my page, it's just going to be the way I intend it. So that's a lot of arguments in favor, but we are paying some prices. There's the aesthetic blips that are happening, whether we use CSS or even a little bit of JavaScript. There is going to be some latency. In fact, one of the biggest complaints against making apps web-based is that they just tend to feel slower. If you're a Facebook user, up until a year or more ago, a lot of the Facebook application, even though it looked like a native application, was using embedded Safari windows inside of it and grabbing content from Facebook's web servers, which is nice because they're already very good at serving up web content, and all they had to do was implement a minimum amount of code to wrap those web pages. But a lot of people, maybe you among them, griped about the speed of the application. And over the past year or more, it's gotten much faster because there's a lot more native